mentioned, hi everyone, and welcome to the Avasant Distinguished Fellows Leadership Session number 2, Leading in the Age of the Great Resignation. My name is Andriana Albert, and I will be your MC today. We have a fantastic group of thought leaders who will be sharing their insights with you throughout the hour. And again, this is a special event where we actually encourage the audience to participate and share their thoughts with our speakers. So we're very much looking forward to that. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator and host, Fred Pond. Fred is the former CIO of Columbia Sportswear, and currently he is SIM RLF Pacific Northwest Facilitator and an Avasant Distinguished Fellow. Fred, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Adriana. It's great to be here again for our second session. I thought back in January we kicked off the series well, and we're now ready to dive into this second one. Dealing with the Great Resignation and the situation that we're all facing as leaders in today's business world. So next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. First of all, I want to have the two speakers. Why don't you go back? Well, just leave it where it is. Have the two panelists we have today introduce themselves. Renee, why don't you do first?
Sure. So thank you, Fred. Hello, fellows and fellow attendees. My name is Renee Lottie. I am currently a fellow and principal advisor at Avasant, but prior to that, I bring about 20 years of experience of Chief Information, Chief Innovation Officer, and Chief Transformation Officer work across a number of industries, Japanese multinational, manufacturing, CPG, and of course, the great tech of Silicon Valley. This is right in my wheelhouse because I'm a business-driven, human capital-driven technologist, and this is one of those topics that is just fascinating to me to discuss and help figure out how we get through this big tsunami that's in front of us. Nice to meet everybody.
Thanks. Now you, Grant.
Hello, Grant Reevy. I am currently the Chief Technology Officer at Vibrant Emotional Health, which is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit focused on enabling access to mental and emotional health care, critical care resources in partnership with the federal government and most of our states and territories. We are in the process of launching a national 988 number for emergency mental health care like 911, which will launch in July of this year. I'm also an executive fellow with the University of St. Thomas Opus College of Business, where I teach graduate courses in technology and technology applications. I've been in technology for the last 2 decades, 15 in consulting, both with Accenture and McKinsey. Very happy to be here.
Thanks, Grant. So I want to kind of start by we've all seen in the last 2 years. And I think for Grant's experience in mental health, the last 2 years have completely changed the landscape in that world. So it's amazing that you're giving back to our country and giving back to everybody that's struggling with your work there. So over 41 million people lost their jobs at the peak of the pandemic. Most of those have all returned to work, but a lot of them have gone into different jobs, different careers, different places. So a mass reshuffling of the employment landscape. 1 million people have taken early retirement, and most of them have said that they will not be returning to work, although with the stock market readjusting itself this winter and spring, that could change as people realize they don't have as much for retirement and need to go back. Currently, there's about 11 million job openings in the US, but there's less than 6 million candidates that are out looking for work. And so that means successful companies are going to have to take people out of a competitor or out of another company to fill the slots they need. So that means a lot of competition. Currently, unemployment's at 3.6%. About 1.7 million total people are on unemployment. And last week's new unemployment filings were about 185,000. All those are 50-year lows. So we are in a crunch on human capital resources available. 4.3 million people resigned in January of this year, almost all of them to take another job. So a lot of moving of people from one job to another. And in February, there was a survey nationally of about 9,000 people, and it came back with almost 50% of those people are either looking or are thinking of looking and changing jobs in 2022. So a lot of things in this. Next slide. So a few other factors to call out around these things, and we'll talk more about them as we get into the discussion. Company position, policy, and culture around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and environmental, social, and governance, all are factors in how employees feel about their company or how candidates feel about looking at a new company, depending upon the posture in those areas. It's very important, mostly to younger professionals. Company position and approach to returning to the office is another factor. I have heard and I know of companies that are coming all back to the office. Obviously, retail and warehousing and things like that have been back. But other jobs, office jobs, are coming back, some full-time, some hybrid and part-time, and some are staying fully remote. So that mix is causing a lot of disruption in the ranks of people and where they want to be and how they think they can be best effective and be best with their family. Higher minimum wages and increased salaries are out there and are very common. So people are jumping for higher wages. But inflation in housing, food, transportation, all are being a factor that, hey, a lot of those gains when someone gets, say, a $8,000 or $10,000 raise, a lot of it's going to go away in higher rent, higher gas prices, and all those things. And higher wages are getting passed through. So that means more inflation in the future. So it's going to be a tough cycle to break. Large increases in people becoming entrepreneurs and independent contractors and freelancers. A lot of growth in that area. People have stepped away from what would be a conventional job and working that way. The growth of companies that have popped up like Upwork and others that are providing those resources has grown dramatically. Clear sense of less long-term outlook and commitment from employees. I think people feel it's healthy to change and grow by potentially moving from one company to another every couple of years. And that's very different than someone from the baby boom generation like me. And then last of all, a number of people during the pandemic were out of work. They went back to school. They're now starting to come out of school. They have a new set of skills. They're going to be looking into new jobs. A lot of that is in tech, but a lot of it in a lot of other areas of our economy. So that brings different and skills and things to the place, but it will be a slow process as they come out. Next slide. So we've never really seen a situation like this that we're facing today. Leadership really must be different now and going forward. All employees are watching and looking for clear, concise, honest direction from their leaders. And we've got to find ways to provide that. Otherwise, they'll look elsewhere. What we'll hear today is some great thoughts from our panelists and views on tools and hopefully techniques you can take back to your office and keep making a difference to lead through this crisis. So leadership just needs to step up and go now. And here's our group. So with that,
Brad, don't mess with you, those crossed arms. I'm not messing with you.
So with that in mind, I just want to throw out a question to get the conversation going with Grant and Renee. So let's start with just saying, what are you seeing either in your company or who you're consulting with or network of people you're working with on this Great Resignation? How real is it? How impactful is it? And how is it playing out for you and people in your network? Let's start with Grant.
Happy to start. So the first thing I'm going to share is I am part of the Great Resignation. Now I personally predated. I left McKinsey in January of 2021 for a lot of the reasons our own employees may be reluctant to remain with our organizations or leaving other organizations. I was part of that. I wasn't feeling the mission. I wasn't feeling the purpose. I wasn't valued by leadership. I wasn't engaged by leadership. And I was burned out because for that first year of the pandemic, I was working really hard and not making forward progress. So I stepped out, and I stepped out without a job in place. I stepped out without a clear plan, and I did all of that with intention. And I remained out of the majority of the workforce for roughly 9 months before I came to Vibrant. I picked up some things along the way. I had many opportunities, but part of that was, what is personally engaging to me? What am I excited about doing? I'm not worried about income, and that is not just a statement that I think someone of my great success can say, right? There's lots of people who will say, I don't want to be in the workforce if the job doesn't, mean something to me, and I can make it work with what I have because that's more important than doing something that I hate. So I'd say that it's real from a personal perspective. I will say that from many of the companies that I have served in my consulting career, it's very, very real. Retention across all levels is a huge issue. You probably all felt that yourselves, and it's not just with younger generations; it's older generations, because it depends on where you're at in your career, right? If you can't be connected, why stay employed, right? You can retire early, you can leave early. There are many options to you. Fred already mentioned all of the sort of options that folks have. So my clients or my former clients are seeing that it's very real. And then what I would say is, as I've come to Vibrant, which is a nonprofit, and we have mission and purpose central to our goal, I've actually found Vibrant to be more resilient in the Great Resignation because we're aligned to purpose. So these are individuals who have largely chosen not to pursue the highest possible compensation, not to necessarily pursue prestige, but instead pursue meaning and purpose. And it's my observation, again, I'm only a few months in, that is actually so engaging to our employees that they're sticking around. We have same amounts of burnout that we see in other organizations, maybe more in some respects, because we don't just suffer from mental health challenges working through a pandemic. We're supporting people who have mental health challenges. So our counselors are really getting it from both ends. But it's a topic we discuss every week as an executive team. And it's something that we're focused on as an organization. Lots more to say about what we might be doing about it, but that's my not so brief answer, Fred. It's real, it's here, I see it everywhere.
Great lead in and great opening. Renee, what do you have to add to that position?
Well, I don't disagree with what Grant said. It is real. And again, as an advisor and a fellow, I coach, I mentor, I teach, and I have clients from obviously for Avasant. And I would say the trends are exactly what Grant described. I would say a couple other nuances to it. So colleagues of mine or friends of mine that are now in these CHRO or the head of VP of HR, whatever you want to call those titles, chief people officer, whatever. They also are expressing or hand wringing right now saying it is real. How do we do this? And I think part of their challenge, which again is another perspective of how to help it, is some of those leaders, as good as they are operating in a personnel leadership role, not a human capital leadership role. It's following old policy, old process, a handbook that was written in the 1900s at some point. And they aren't doing the human capital piece, which Grant's really highlighted. It's about the softer skills, what are you going to do to help people, profit, planet, those kind of questions. That would be my one opinion. So it's kind of there's a human capital leadership role. They need to switch out to demonstrate that the company really is who they say they are. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, and I got it from one of those colleagues yesterday saying, yes, Renee, this is real, because I was asking, what are you all seeing? They sent me this, it's called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And everyone knows Edelman, it's a great PR firm. They do a trust barometer, it's about 30,000 interviews. And the one that they just recently did somewhat on this topic around purposeful organizations, great resignations. So it's not just the employees, it's not just the candidates. So the statistic, I'm going to read off my piece of sheet paper here to make sure I get it right. Of the 30,000 interviews, and this is a 2022 report, 60% of potential employees, so candidates, 60% of potential employees, 58% of consumers, and then 64% of investors, in addition to the employees, all say the purposeful component, the DEI, the ESG, the show me. If I walked into a room, I could see that this company is doing what they say they're doing without a poster, without a website, without a t-shirt. Show me that, or I'm voting with my dollars. Either I'm going to go find a different employer, I am going to go buy another different product, or I'm going to invest in some other startup. And so I think that's another dynamic to this situation that says, where are the levers to pull to fix it? Well, I think those were three that are absolutely part of the equation to fix. And then I would say the last thing, which kind of to Grant's point, I too have seen this scenario before. We all know the great Cotter quote that culture eats strategy for lunch. Anybody that's doing transformation for the last 20 years, I just think it's never more reality of that quote than it is now. And I would say culture eats technology strategy, digital transformation, and pandemic for lunch. If you don't get the culture right, we're seeing it just exacerbated right now with all of the situations going on. So there's my non-brief answer, Fred.
No, that's great. Great add to it. So, I hear the factors, the pandemic was part of this, but it's not the whole thing. The EI, ESG, where people are leading. So how is this going to play out, and how long do you think this could last? Can you comment on where you see this going? It's not something that's just going to be solved in a week or a month. Where do you see this playing out? Why don't we start with you, Renee?
Well, I think that, the old famous pendulum that swings one way, it goes the other. There are companies, and I know them too, Fred, that are everyone back in the office, everyone back in the deep end of the pool, damn it, right? There's like an exclamation point at the end of it. And I think that's going to not play out well, and especially for tech companies who's proven that they can run themselves globally without all being in the office. So I think it's going to come back to be it's going to come back to some balance where when the dust settles, and I think there'll be some casualties and carnage along the way, some dead bodies in the way, as we figure it out in terms of startups or existing companies that just don't make it, or executives. I mean, the highest level executive turnover right now is the CHRO, and I think we can probably understand why. The highest scarcity of a role, if we could want to all go back to being CIOs, Grant, that's like the number one scarce resource to hire. And not only that, they're trying to expand the role to make it a business-driven CTO, CIO role. So that's recognizing that something has to change at the DNA of a company. For those that actually are doing that and hiring things like chief purpose officers or chief mental health officers, that's another new one. I think they'll find a new balance. They'll figure out how to ask less of their employees at the job, but in general get more out of them in terms of the holistic view of really, truly work-life balance. For those that don't figure it out, I think they're going to churn some more. And unfortunately, that will contribute to our big, all the macroeconomic statistics, both here in the US and around the world. And then I know Grant probably has more details on this, but the whole $350 billion gig industry, I think that was the number at the end of December of 2021, we got to address that. That's just that's a growing and predicted to grow even more. And I think that's going to add a new dynamic that I think Grant probably has some additional thoughts on.
Okay, yeah, we'll whip it over to you, Grant. I mean, great thoughts, Renee. And I agree that with, all the level setting you did there.
Yeah, I think there was a question on is this a short term shift or a long term shift? And as Renee says, the pendulum has swung. This is a long term shift. The proverbial walls have been shattered, and we're now in a new and uncomfortable era. And I say uncomfortable because it's uncomfortable for us as leaders and employers to realize that we don't have the sorts of control that we used to in terms of retention, right? It used to be the only place you could go for healthcare in the U.S., and this is the U.S.-centric view, not a Eurocentric view, but in the U.S. was your employer. That's changed in the last decade with the Affordable Care Act. People can get healthcare elsewhere. It used to be that if you didn't have a job, you had to kind of supplicate to a larger corporate entity to get a job. That's no longer true with the gig work. If I quit my job today, I can have income tomorrow, and there is no barrier to entry for me driving for Uber or delivering for DoorDash or doing gig labor of any kind. And so now, as employers, we are in competition with a million more endpoints than we were before. So this gig work has changed the game. The ACA has changed the game. And then, of course, the pandemic has changed the game because everybody has largely been at home and realized, hey, I can be equal, if not more productive at home, and I don't have to commute, and I get to spend more time with my family, and I can create flexibility in my day. Okay, none of those add up to any compelling reason why I would go back to the office from an employee perspective.
Yeah.
Right, that there's no compelling reason there. So we're in a period of change that's here to stay, right? If we look back in history, probably the closest analogy is we can get to where we are now is the Great Transition from World War II into the actual boom culture that resulted in Fred, right, in the late 40s, 50s, 60s here. And so then we have this, 60-year period where the power's been in the hands of the employer. It's reasonable to expect that we are going to be in a long period here where more power is in the hands of the employee.
And the one thing, Grant, just to say that pendulum is swung, and you're right, it's broken. It's broken through something. And, if for all of Avasant, they all know I just kind of speak my mind. So excuse the explanation, but it's true. So the taboos, all these taboos that we used to have, we don't talk about, right? That transparency and all the things, we've broken through that and we've humanized them. So how many of you know or watch on TV those commercials about, obviously there's the mental health commercials all the time with famous Olympic athletes. There is the women poop commercial on TV now. I mean, it's hilarious, and they've humanized it, and we all now talk about it. And that's part of that shattering of that thing that just all of a sudden we're talking about it at home and between watching whatever we're watching on TV in the evenings with their families. There's mental health. There is suicide commercials or how do you help somebody if they've been extra quiet? All of that we used to just get very uncomfortable with, as Grant said. Well, we still may be uncomfortable with it, but it's in our face and we need to talk about it. And so I think saying we're going to go back to normal, both physically in an office and not having the margin of your entire life being pulled together and your employer is a piece of this whole thing, I think is ignorant to say that will happen. So.
Okay. No, really great points. We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, but I want to tee up one more baseline first before we do that. And that is, do you really see differences in the different age groups? Obviously, baby boomers are at that retirement age now over the next 5 or 8 years, where that's a factor. But what about Gen X, millennials, Gen Y? Is there a big difference there? And with that, does it impact industries differently? The tech industry versus retail or some other industry. So comment on those things. Come back to you on that, Grant.
Yeah, there is a difference generationally. I'm going to say that it's of a mindset and a willingness to express things, which is somewhat learned. So if I think about the boomers, right, they came of age with parents who lived through the Great Depression and lived through World War II. And it was kind of just a grit it and do it, right? Don't complain, just do it. And it was also very much kind of a culture where you lived with one organization for your entire career. You did your 30 years, you got your pension, you got out, right? And that was the expectation. And so there is a greater willingness to accept personal friction because it's a learned behavior on what you were expected to do. Now, if I go to the other end of the spectrum with Gen Z that's just entering the workforce now, that is not the experience that they have grown up with. That's not the experience their Gen X parents are having, right? And so as they enter the workforce, all the other things we could say about Gen Z and kind of perspectives aside, as they enter the workforce, they're much more willing to self-assert. They're much more willing to move if the context doesn't meet their needs. And some of that we could uncharitably, interpret as neediness, but some of that is not, right? Some of that is we are not meeting our employees' needs, and Gen Z is just much more willing to say, I'm out, guys. I'm going to move on because I've got options, and there are options. So I do see some differences there. This poses some structural challenges for us as we think about the development of our organizations, because our leaders are largely in an older generation, and the mindset and perspective of those individuals is not aligned with the mindset and the perspective of the new employees that we want to hire and retain. And so we're not going to convert people's mindsets. That's not how this really works. So we need to expand the range of things that we're able to do. Not everybody needs everything, but we need to be aware of what people want and be able to address it. So I think, and this is the last thing that I'll say, and then I'm sure Renee's got additional comments, is that the most agile organizations are going to be those with younger leadership or more diverse leadership, with more agility to think laterally from the legacy world. We're already seeing that in the startup space, of course, the tech space, which is predominantly Gen X leadership for big tech, and Gen Y too. They are much more agile. And of course, that's where employees are going. Big tech, big dollars, big benefits, big flexibility, everything's there. Of course, they're attracting talent. Renee?
Yeah, so, and I what Grant said, it is a mindset. And while we can't deprogram mindsets and reprogram a different way, because it is a mindset and there is some willingness, like I consider myself hopefully contemporary, not a Gen Z, but thinking that way or appreciating the value of it, I think it is possible that others will shift or understand the value of that are from those other generations you mentioned, Fred. And I would say an example of that, there's actually two. One is the Japanese multinational I worked for before here. I had to get on a plane to go to Tokyo for most of my career for a 1-hour meeting. The thought of Zoom or video, it wasn't a technical challenge, it was a culture challenge. And all of a sudden the pandemic hit. Japan had probably one of the worst outbreaks and locked themselves down. And guess what? Overnight, magically, some of these employees that have been at the same company for 30 years and come to their desk every morning at 8:02 a.m. and sit with lunch and tea goes at 12:02 p.m. and all of a sudden we're working from home. And it worked, but it was something that had to just shock them in the butt to do it. But now they've expanded what's the possibility, and that particular company, among others, now has a much more innovative way of thinking. But it took a catalytic event like a pandemic. I say the other one is it's a university, and he's the CIO of a university, and he talked about because of a mandate, we can't connect everybody on our very well-known university everyone can't come to the university anymore. We can't have all our 40,000 students show up. So we got to do it overnight. We got to do it virtually. Quick, do it. He got the fastest funding, and as all of us as tech executives who have to go through the bureaucracy of here's the business value for my technology project, and here's the approval, and here's the capital, and that whole process that usually takes months with the CFO and the approving capital committee, it took him 4 days. So all of a sudden, while he knew it could be done in 4 days, everyone around him did not. So you've actually opened up the mindset of these elders, if you will, or seasoned executives saying, wow, you can do it that way. So I'm a little more optimistic to say you can teach old dogs new tricks under certain conditions.
Okay. Switch gears a little bit now, and I want to hear your ideas on leading through this. What are some great takeaways? What are some wins or things that you think leaders need to focus on to turn this around and be an influential differentiator in this? Start with you, Renee.
Well, I think there's two. The old leadership used to be described probably as centralized command and control-ish. Now, not black and white in any of this. These are generalizations. But I think one of the things is the soft skills that everyone gets uncomfortable talking about. But as thought leaders for the future, regardless of your age or your gender or your ethnicity or your religious beliefs, if you aren't an orchestrator and a coach, if you're not building culture versus building teams, you're missing the boat in the future. And I think to Grant's point, some of the startups, if you go look under the covers and just stand in the room where those new leaders are, don't ask questions, just listen. You would hear it's a building culture way of speaking from these new leaders. It is a orchestrator and coaching way of building their new company. And then I think the other one takeaway is it's called co-creation. And it's not about there's a department that invents our stuff, and then there's this other department that rolls it out, and there's this other one that writes the policy. I think in the future, leadership needs to understand co-creation across departments, and I would say even across countries, if there's a multinational component to your organization, where you need to find, again, design thinking. You need to find the most diverse set of people to bring together to solve what we're trying to sort through now, in a way that you maybe have never thought of before. So those would be my suggestions in terms of what is it going to feel like? And then I would say last is you got to measure it. So if there aren't KPIs for a couple of these things, whether it's diversity or whether it's an ESG contribution back to the marketplace, whatever it is, you got to walk the talk and no posters and t-shirts and websites. And you need to show that, and you need to be very repetitive with showing a purposeful contribution that you are doing it, because it's going to take a while for some employees to see that you really are doing what you say you want to do. Those would be mine.
Great points, Renee. And I want to touch on something. We were using the word soft skills in that when I was still a CIO at Columbia, and we switched it. My boss and I decided we're going to call those essential skills. Mm-hmm. Essential to how everybody is going to make it if you're going to create that collaborative workforce that works across the departments and things. So we started to push, and this was a number of years ago. They're not soft skills, they are essential skills, and anybody that's going to thrive is going to demonstrate those. So it is a very powerful thing.
Yep.
Turn it over to you,
Grant.
Yeah, 2 thoughts, maybe 3 thoughts. We'll see what comes out. The first piece is, really being value and purpose oriented in your organization or a whole, or the division within your organization. So advantage me with a nonprofit. We're all mission and purpose oriented, but now we can be that anywhere. The challenge is it's not simply enough to have a mission statement or a purpose statement or a set of values, because people are extraordinarily sensitive to any conflict there. If I'm gonna make a statement, I'm gonna say McKinsey has a set of values. McKinsey also supported the Sackler family and the expansion of opioid distribution in the United States. The values and the support of that work don't align. Now, I can make a whole bunch of other lists there, right? We could point to the, McKinsey support of CNN Plus launch and the absolute debacle that is, which is just in the news last week. That's less of a values issue, other than it's a mission issue. We did, McKinsey's firm didn't really help them. It might have been great strategy for Netflix 20 years ago, but it's not great strategy for a streaming platform now. So having something but not living it is not going to help. You have to live it. You have to give people access to the value, the mission, the purpose of what you're doing. And in my organization, what that means tactically is everybody is there to help. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's on the phone answering crisis calls. It means that everybody feels that they're, no more than one step removed from that support. So from my tech team, right? My tech team has this huge drive to help. And I can't say, don't help out so-and-so in the organization when they call you as opposed to following the process, because that thread that's being pulled is this mission and purpose within the individual on my tech team who wants to help, and then they feel like a crisis counselor, and then they feel like they're contributing to the mission of the organization as a whole. Right? It's very powerful in terms of how it expresses itself. The second thing that I'm going to say is we need to move the things that we're thinking about that our employees value out of the transactional and into the relational. Yep. So as we're talking about essential skills, will people leave your organization because they're looking for more money? Yes, absolutely. Unless you're Google or Amazon or Facebook, you cannot compete at the top tier, period. So money is a thing. Bonuses are a thing. Benefits are a thing, but they're transactional things. They don't substitute for a mentoring relationship. They don't substitute for having a conversation with your boss or your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss about, someone's personal life. And that can be a very simple thing. It doesn't have to be, setting up a mentoring program. Actually, that would be probably somewhat detrimental, because you want people to want to do it, right? And we can talk about how we need to think differently about selecting management here and developing it. The simple story I should give you is I got an out of office message from a member on my team who's, we're 3 levels separated, something like that. He's out of office, and his out of office said, I'm sick today. I'm out of the office, but call me if you need me. And I responded back with, I don't want to hear from you. If you're sick, you're off the clock. I don't want you answering calls. I want you doing anything. I want you to focus on you. And I left it at that. I didn't hear back from him. I didn't expect to, but I did hear back from him a week later. It's like, hey, just wanted you to know that meant a lot, that you're there to defend me and defend my health. And it's not just say it, do it, right? And I've interceded a number of times on behalf of people. So, but that's a relational thing. It sounds, maybe it could be transactional, responding back, but it's like, I'm building a relationship with this individual. I'm building a relationship with this manager. I'm building a relationship with the rest of the organization in defending space, and everybody around is watching that. So you're building relationships in a one-to-many scenario when they see, oh, Grant responded and said, if you're sick, that's your time, not anybody else's time. And even if you're able to answer the phone, you shouldn't. And he's going to try and help you so you don't feel like you have to. And he's going to help the rest of the organization so that they can't do it. Yep. So shifting our thinking from transactional to relational. Yeah. Go ahead, Fred.
No, that's just a great story that ties into it's a mindset, and you really do have to be thinking that way. And it's different than, when I managed most of the teams in my past, that wasn't really a process that I would have thought that I would need to reach out and do those kind of things. But that engagement and connection with employees makes them feel like they're part of something bigger. So I love that story, and I think it's powerful. So we're going to switch gears a little bit now. And rather than open up with another question or something, I want to kind of go to a lightning round where we'll go to each of myself and the panelists, and we're going to kind of summarize what are some great takeaways you heard or things you learned. What are some key things that we need to make sure of? And really, what is a key takeaway that every business leader should have as we battle this landscape that we're in today? So we'll start with Renee.
Key takeaways. I guess it's always good to do in threes. So looking at my notes really quick. So I think Grant, you said it early on. We're uncomfortable. Get ready to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because this isn't going away anytime fast, especially as leaders, and especially as leaders who actually want to get through this and be one of the thought leading companies that bring the Gen Zs and all that creative thinkers to the table to compete in the marketplace under your banner. So that's one. So that's get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Two, I like the idea of soft skills being essential skills, and leadership skills are essential skills. I think we need to get rid of the soft skill, because it has such a negative or squishy connotation in a negative way when you say it to certain people, not everybody, but I think essential skills, and everybody should have those essential skills. It's not just leadership, but everybody. And Grant's story highlights that. A simple email like, I don't want to hear from you till you feel better. That's awesome. And then the third one, I think, is really the takeaway of all the things we talked about that need to happen to combat that great resignation. I think it's just, how do you measure it? Like in a room, like I like to tell the story. If I walked into a room, I closed my eyes and I just listened, would I hear it? Could I hear it in the culture of a company? Could I measure it? Not to anything that's the PR and the marketing part. That I think is super important, because that's the authenticity of what we're trying to do, or what companies should be trying to do. And authenticity does not show up on t-shirts. Authenticity shows up in every single day when you go to work, virtually or physically, and you close your eyes and you listen to what's happening in a room, in a conversation, and do you hear it? Those would be my three.
Awesome. Great points. Thank you very much. Grant, how about you?
I apologize. I lost audio as you were introducing the question. If you can give me the brief synopsis
Sure.
of what you want me to answer.
Throw out your 2 or 3 takeaways that you got from what we've talked about here, and what you think are the most important thing or things for leaders and business people to change or address going forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Number one, I would say set aside everything you've learned before about hiring, retaining, engaging employees. It's generally not going to be helpful. The landscape has shifted dramatically, so what you learned can't be where you live going forward. You can pull things back in over time, but you're going to do yourself the most service by setting it aside. The second is bring your human self to work, and encourage all of your people to do the same. We've had this massive merger of personal lives and professional lives over the last 2 years, but we've been on that track probably for the better part of the last 2 decades, maybe 3 decades. We should continue on that track. And that gets to the authenticity that Renee was just talking about, is if you are bringing your whole self to work, you're going to be able to engage in things like value and purpose and mission. You're going to be able to build relationships versus bringing just a persona, a boss persona, a leader persona, executive persona, whatever it is. Those are not things that are going to help you. So bring your whole self to work, and don't be afraid to do so. I expect my dog to jump up here in the background. Your kids run through the background, right? We're all used to those things, but that's because we have lives that are not our job. and bringing some of those aspects into it is going to be meaningful. And the last thing we'll say real briefly is don't be afraid to try new things. Try something new. See if it works. If it does, great. If it doesn't, great. But try new things.
Perfect. Thank you for all that. And I guess my key takeaways and things that I really latched onto today that got to happen is, how do you get real, true employee engagement and recognition? Because if there isn't a connection and they don't really feel a key part of the mission, the goals, the why the company's there, why their job's there, where they are going to disengage, and that may mean leaving and those kind of things. So I think that is one really key one that I heard. I think the idea of this mentality of co-creation that Renee brought out, I really latch onto that. I think the idea that, it's cross-functional and it's oriented to how you change business or how you evolve business, because we can't stop changing, and we haven't over the last 2 years. In some ways, we've sped up change in business, has been touched on. But I think that idea that you're not throwing it over the wall and you're this, it's all done together and cohesively builds that meaning and that stuff, and I think will help with this thing. And then I guess the third and last item is really around, and I think Renee touched on it some, about human resources. And I would say back in a lot of my career, human resources was kind of an evil word. They had a bunch of rules, they did all those things. That has got to and has now changed. That's why I think she mentioned that more openings are in those roles, or than almost anything. It is a tough job, and it means so much more, and it is more focus. And I think how they evolve and help the rest of the business with the mindsets and the changes and the tools that can allow the kind of recruiting that's not just looking at resumes and how those things are, and making sure that diversity and that ESG all is in the mix of the company really makes a difference. And I think that's my last takeaway. So with that, we're kind of at the point, I think I turn it back over to Adriana.
Yep. Thanks so much, Fred. And thank you to all of our speakers and our audience today. So now what we'd like to do is we'd like to invite everyone to turn on their microphones and cameras, or both, to share in the conversation. So we wanted this to be very special and interactive. So again, we have survey questions. We have questions that Fred posed earlier. We also have the insights that the speakers have shared. So we'd love to encourage all of you to participate in this conversation. So we will be fielding your questions and comments via the raise your hand feature on the dashboard. So once your hand is raised, you'll be asked to turn on your microphone and share your thoughts. So I think what we're going to start with is the last question that Fred posed was leadership, why now and what's different? So Fred, we'd love to hear your thoughts just a little bit more on this topic, and then we can open it up to the audience.
Sure. Happy to kind of tee it up that way and get it started. And please, everybody, be open to, throwing out your thoughts and questioning or challenging the panel and I on any, I think the reason for now is we are at a key breaking point. Some of those statistics I threw out are shattering all kinds of records. 4 million people leaving their jobs to take new jobs. The disruption that comes through that, if you're trying to run an organization or a company, or even a store if you're in a retail environment, that is dramatic. And the idea that you can keep a business going with those kind of changes and be able to refill the ranks and keep things progressing is really at a tipping point. And if we aren't doing it, and you aren't listening and hearing what's going on in your organization and making changes to address it, your company is going to be at risk. So I think that's why now is paramount. And we've had other crises. We always find ways to get through them, but this one is different.
I think for that's the definition of, oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, it's the definition of insanity, right? Do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome.
Yeah.
We cannot expect something different if we keep using the same playbook that we've used for the last 20 years.
And I think everybody made it really clear, this is not in a short-term problem that's going to go away later this year or anything. This is a systemic or a a fundamental change to how business is going to operate and be successful.
So I saw some comments from Wally, from Kim Terry, from Jim Rinaldi, Libby. Anyone want to comment on this?
Yeah, I saw a few chat notes. Why don't those people that were
Come
chatting
show yourselves.
show yourself?
Show yourselves.
I know you're still in your jammas.
And you can just go on audio. You don't have to go on video.
Hi, this is Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Hi there. A couple of things. First of all, it's great to talk about employees, and we need employees. But it's also the workforce, and the workforce is shifting. Where I think it was mentioned earlier about the gig workforce. It's going to be. It looks like it's going to be a mixture of employee and non-employee, but still part of the workforce. As a leader and as a manager, you're going to want productivity out of that workforce, and you may have to use different styles to motivate that. You hopefully don't want to use just a contract to motivate one part of the workforce and a relationship to motivate another part of the workforce. So I think management has to learn a new styles, new ways of leading, and I'd be interested in your thoughts around that. Leadership is not necessarily a consistent trait of management, but certainly you would like to see more leadership in management that takes a proactive stance to supporting the workforce. So I'll leave you with this one simple thing. It is my belief that the management is there to support the workforce, not the other way around. And again, I focus on workforce, not just employees.
Yeah, I'll make
go ahead,
to start, Jim. I totally agree. The workforce is going to have a different mix. It used to be a lot of companies didn't have a lot of independents or freelancers or contractors. That is going to be a big part of any and all successful companies, and how they make those gig workers or a mix of those things come in. And they've got to find magic around how, and you don't want to treat one group versus another and create animosity between those contractors or those freelancers versus the people that are, there day to day for the company. And you want to make sure that they're treated in a common way that allows everybody to thrive. And I think it is different than especially a lot of older school companies, the brick and mortar and manufacturing and things that have been around a long time. So,
so Fred, maybe a comment to Jim's comment. But we have seen this before, kind of to Grant's point, some of this is repetitive. So as a CIO, I used to do managed services and outsource, nearshore, offshore, in a way that said, I don't care what your badge says. Do you work for Sun? Do you work for my company? Do you work for Infosys? Do you work for whoever? I'm going to visit all of you, all your offices, and you're all the same. So it doesn't matter what the badge says. It's how do you engage with them? And I think some companies have already learned how to do this. It just is in a different context. So I think to Jim's point, absolutely, it is workforce. And any of us at Avasant that do a lot of this work as managed services, help to companies, that is one of the pieces that we're trying to make sure gets understood. It's not dump it over the wall to another part of the world. It's not treat somebody differently, but it's how do you make sure that the diversity of skill set that best serves the purpose of the organization, which hopefully is a purposeful organization, is among these different types of workers that come to your company every day. So I think we've done it before, just not in the way that we talk about gig workers, but gig workers are no different. We treat them the same.
So I have a question from Anupam too.
Oh.
Anupam, are you still on? I saw a hand.
Yes, I'm on. Somehow my camera is not turning on. So anyway, so I think all great points. And Fred, I just wanted to maybe emphasize few things about hiring for this, what I call the next gen workforce, right? A lot of things have changed. The nature of work has changed. The nature of the workplace has changed, right? because of the pandemic. And due to automation and AI and chatbot enablement, the basic job roles are changing. And if they're not, they should be. And while we can say that's all driving great efficiencies and, promoting digitization and transformation and all of that, I think a more fundamental reason is that the coming generation of workforce, the Gen Zs and whatever we want to call that group, they are not wanting to do the same kind of jobs that their parents or even, let's say, 5-10 years ago the workforce did. They don't want to be doing those mundane jobs. Plus, their motivation for jobs has changed. They're looking for companies where there's a higher priority on 3 areas, which I believe is what I've been hearing recently, talking to a lot of C-level executives. And again, Fred, you touched upon, I think most of them. One is purpose. They want the organization's purpose to align with their sort of purpose in whatever it is that they care about, right? Or their role to align with that purpose within that organization. Secondly, empathy, which is very, very important. Empathetic leadership, as you've talked about, that's key way to attract this next gen workforce. And third is adaptability, meaning they don't want to join and do that same role for years and years. They want the ability to move up or move laterally, and they want the employers to give them an opportunity to change their roles, to reskill, upskill. All of that has to be part of the job description. So there is a fundamental shift in this coming age of workers, and we have to adapt to it. So it's not just the company has to transform or there's technology available to do all this. It's because the workforce fundamentally has changed, the expectations have changed. And if the leadership doesn't adapt their hiring and their retention and their training and their career advancement policies to that, this coming workforce is not going to join those companies. They're going to miss out on that generation. So that was just my point. I don't know what you guys think about that.
No, I would agree, Anupam. I think those 3 are key, to this whole mix of things. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to comment.
No, this is Naresh, by the way. I completely agree with what Anupam said. In fact, I was kind of going that direction because I think to what Renee brought up earlier as well is that the HR organizations need to completely transform themselves and how they think. The old school approach and the structure they establish and the rules of engagement and salary stuff, all that has to be thrown out the door, and have to re-look at it completely differently. Because, in fact, I was reading an article the other day where some of the Gen Z, since you guys were talking about it earlier, and I know Grant brought it up as well, is they switch jobs and then 3 months later, like, okay, I don't like this, I'm going to go somewhere else. So how do we retain this workforce? I think we need to start with what we have and also set the structure up for the new hires we're bringing in so we can retain them. Otherwise, this is going to be, chaos, even further chaos over the next several years.
So a couple
I
thoughts.
think if
Go ahead, Grant.
I'll say I agree that there's some chaos that we're about to enter. No matter what we do in Rush, right? We're entering a period of instability as we figure out how to handle things here. Part of it is friction on expectations for Gen Z versus the structure that was set up by Boomer Gen X. And one of the ways that I've talked about this is apprenticeship. In the old world, when you hired an entry-level employee, you had them do one of these jobs that was repetitive so that they could kind of learn the function, prove that they could do the function, and then gradually get introduced to variations, right? And all of that is now automated. Okay, so that job that we had them do to learn the organization and the business no longer actually exists. And the individual does not want to do that job. That entry-level individual in Gen Z does not want to do that repetitive thing. They want to do something that is engaging to them, and how they engage with that is different. We can't kind of present something to them and just say, okay, this is what you're going to do. We have to kind of give them the why, on why they need to do this to learn and work their way up, and then continually engage with that conversation, which is very difficult. We don't have any mechanism to do that. It's not the way our managers or supervisors think. I haven't yet seen any organization unlock that fully. And so I don't know that there are good examples for us to follow yet, which is why I say that we're going to be in this sort of chaotic period for entry-level employees, because until there is a model for us to figure out how to handle someone who wants a different role every 3 months, we're just going to be throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks.
So I'm all about take advantage of chaos. I've always lived by that motto, so I think this is a great opportunity. But I do want to recognize Libby and Walter both have had their hands up. So maybe Libby, your thoughts.
Hey, Renee, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. So what I was thinking of, if we took another look at this and we thought about what are the opportunities that all of this chaos, which I love the word, presents for a company like Avasant. When you're looking at building business strategy and you're looking at, we've all worked in organizations where you had the historian that's been there 100 years. Okay, so nobody wants to let him go because he's the only guy that knows the system, right? We've all had that. So now that's not going to be the case anymore. This guy's going to be able to go out and get another job because to Fred's presentation, there's 11 million jobs and 6 million people. So, how now does a company hire somebody new and get them up to speed quickly? How do we still keep productive? And I think that's something that it's almost like a white paper right now. We don't know the answer yet, but I think that's something that, as an executive strategy team that I think Avasant really has those experts, is something that we could really look at and say, okay, where's there some opportunities here for us? That was my take. It's excellent. I love the presentations.
Great. Wally?
Yeah. First of all, Fred and Grant and Renee, excellent points and excellent plays off of each other. I love the straight shooting that you guys have of, you're not sugarcoating it. It's going to be here for a while. Throw out your old thoughts on this. It's not going to work. Great advice. I've lived through what I'll call 4 parts of this in terms of having a full-time CIO role, and then the pandemic hitting after I retired for the first time, and then going back to a full-time role, and then stepping away and saying I want to do some different things. And what strikes me is that both employers as well as employees need to learn from this. In the pandemic, employers cut employees like there was no tomorrow, right? Couldn't get rid of people fast enough. I watched people in my former company just be laid off in waves. Worse than laid off is we're putting you on furlough, and we'll let you know in 3-4 months that maybe we'll bring you back, and then they didn't, and so forth. And it was really employer advantage for that period of time, and a number of people struggled to find new roles. Right? It wasn't that long ago that unemployment swelled to a great degree, and you couldn't find a CIO job, or you couldn't find a technical role. And now it's reversed, that employers can't bring those people back far enough. And now it's, as either Grant or Renee or Fred talked about, right? It's employee or workforce advantage. It's probably going to stay that way for some period of time. So I think the key thing is putting yourselves in both camps and remembering and treating the other party with compassion, honesty, and respect. One of the other things that happened as employers were laying people off is you'd apply for jobs and you'd be ghosted. You wouldn't hear anything, any response back. So I think it's for both parties to learn from this and say that it's not going to be this way forever. It's a roller coaster, and treating each other with that respect of with this changed lifestyle, with hybrid, with all the other changes in our life, with global supply chain problems, with everything else. How do we partner together to solve it versus taking advantage of the situation that we're in and it being problematic? That's how I think we begin to solve it.
Well, Walter, I think you've hit on the mental health component. I'm sure Grant has even more insight than I do in terms of what you just said. You're ghosted. You got fired. You walked out the door. All of a sudden, your account doesn't work, and you're trying to virtually log in, or you log into a Zoom call, and instead of your boss there, there's the head of HR and your boss. Like it's same. I can relate to a lot of my colleagues that have gone through that. And then the employer and the employee both need to be more, our workforce and company need to both be more empathetic. I would challenge the employers, the minute, this is probably more US centric, the minute there are additional healthcare options for the gig workers, this is going to become a bigger problem for the employers. Because one of the challenges that you have today in the US, and I said it's the US challenge, and not to get into politics of it, but just in general, getting good health care as a gig worker for a family is challenging. So sometimes they make a decision to do X for that other benefit. But the minute that becomes something more, there's more creative options, and I understand there are some on the horizon, at least state by state, that is going to be a bigger challenge for the world of our employers, our company employers, and we need to be more two-way, two-directional, especially when it comes to the mental health or the physical health of people. That's an important component when they're evaluating where to go next.
Yeah, I think Walter, I think you hit on really good things. And it was mentioned earlier that transition from transactional, what we do with people, to that relationship. I mean, that was a great call out earlier in the session. And I think the idea that you can, call somebody up on Zoom and surprise them with HR and make a termination or something, that should be, unforgivable in today's world. And we need to move to where that just much more relationship oriented. And, there will be times when someone has to be let go or something like that, but it can be done in a completely different way than what we did in the last 2 years. And I think that will build strength for a company, as their reputation will grow and people will want to migrate toward that, as they're looking for additional resources and people.
So Fred, we've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
I think a great way to end usually is we like to ask the audience, what will you take forward from today's discussion?
Right.
So if anyone would like to share, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Any volunteers, including panelists?
Hi, this is Kim Terry. Sorry, my camera button disappeared here, but I'll just talk through audio. The thing I see is perhaps employees or workers are shifting faster than companies are, in the respect that we may be going back to what was more traditional prior to the Industrial Revolution, where people just plied their trade at various companies or organizations as needed, and they came and went. And in many cases, I see companies still looking at employees as if they're industrial age workers, where we need people to show up at 8 o'clock on the assembly line each day and be consistent for 30 years. So I would encourage companies to go along with where the workers are going in terms of a shift of how they engage with their employers.
Great point. Others?
Hi, it's Chitra with Avasant Foundation and Avasant. Sorry, my camera is not working either. I don't know why. Maybe it's a camera problem today. But but one of the things I just wanted to add.
Uh-oh. I think she.
Victor, I think your
Okay,
camera's working
can you
now.
hear me?
Yeah,
Oh,
you
yeah.
can turn your
Oh,
camera on now.
sorry. Okay. So great conversation. You touched on a lot of topics, but one thought that comes to play is it's not one size that fits all, especially when it comes to women. You know, in the past year, you know, companies have adopted, they've adopted a hybrid model of working, especially considering that this pandemic is here to stay, or however it evolves, companies are evolving with it. But one of the biggest challenges that we have seen during this pandemic is how it's impacted women and women at their workplace. And I wish that we could have maybe a third session on talking a little bit about some of the minority groups that are being impacted, how it's being impacted in the emerging economies, especially in the developing nations, where we do a lot. Avasant Foundation does a lot of work, and we see the impact there. And also, you know, talking about this resignation, a lot of women have not come back to work as yet, only because even with the hybrid model, there is not enough opportunities for them to make that switch or that change to be able to have a career and manage their household and the children. So I think that would have been interesting I would have loved to have heard more from the panel about that. But overall, it was a fantastic panel discussion. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Chitra. So I will tell
think
you.
that's
Oh, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a great point. I mean, we need to talk about all sorts of groups because they are represented differently here. Women haven't returned. The United States lags the modern world in a social support network in terms of childcare and family care and elder care. Those resources don't exist, and so then people are forced to make a choice between employment and family relationships. You know, we talked about transactional versus relational. You want to talk about a benefit that people want? Childcare support, right? They want retail discounts. They don't want a yoga class. They don't want a mindfulness app on their phone. They want support for their children, even if that doesn't mean that they come back to work full time. So that's part of it. And in the U.S., of course, where predominantly women are seen as minders of the household and raisers of the children, that's starting to shift a little bit. It's not true for everyone, but again, I think that when we were talking in this section, we're predominantly talking about people who are well educated, maybe inclined to be male identified, right? There's a lot more to the workforce here that we should care about, that we need to address when we think about, you know, how do we create opportunities where people want to come back to work. And it is not coming back to work for income, it's because they want to, because it adds value to their lives.
And Grant, I was just going to pony on that. Again, this is one of those things that you and I have seen before. Something called job sharing is not a new concept. It's probably more relevant today. If we're all outcomes based, outcomes driven, we just want, you know, an employer needs this thing to be done. If 3 part-time women who also need to be the primary caretaker at home can do that, why the heck not? And I think, and I'd say women, it could be men, it could be, you know, co-parenting, whatever it is. But during the pandemic, super hard. I was the tech support for my whole neighborhood when unfortunately, more moms and dads had to stay home and zoom in on 5 different schools and make sure it's all connected so they can actually take their class, because Hawaii was very rigid about you can't come back unless X happens. And so there was 5 different classrooms happening in certain houses depending on what school they went to. Moms, for the most part, were the primary. Dads were super helpful too, but sometimes that's just kind of how the blue and pink chores get assigned in a house sometimes. And I think that's a great way to look at it in a new way. Job sharing. It's not a new idea, but it might actually have sticking power this time.
We are just about out of time, Fred. If you want to wrap it up, then I'll say a
Yeah,
thing?
I think that was a great closing, Grant and Renee, and I think that's right. We need to think of functionally different, and sharing and things would be a great one. I want to thank everybody for being here today, the conversations, the points, just a lot of great content.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you gained insights that you can take forward on your own leadership journey. If you're interested in speaking at an upcoming event, please email us for details. And of course, we hope to see you at part 3 of our leadership series, Continuous Learning for Lifelong Leading, which will take place in July. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.